Welcome everyone to for most of us, a very white day.
Okay, the reading from Emmett Fox is titled Your Counselor. The prophet Isaiah also calls this child counselor. A counselor is one who gives guidance. If you are worried because you do not know whether to take an important step, to accept a business offer, to sign an important document, to enter upon a partnership, to resign your position, to trust someone, to say something, the child will be your counselor. In the third place, the prophet reveals to us who the child really is. It is no less than God Himself, the mighty God, and truly the mystic power that transforms and transmutes and transfigures is God Himself, always present with you and always available. And the scripture is from John's Gospel, chapter 14, verse 10. The Father that dwells in me, He doth the works. And Brian's going to read from Lamsa. It says here to read verses 10 through 17.
Okay. Do you not believe that I am with my Father, and my Father is with me? The words that I speak, I do not speak of myself, but my Father who abides with me does these works. Believe that I am with my Father, and my Father is with me, and if not, believe because of the works. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who believes in me shall do the works which I do, and even greater than these things shall he do, because I am going to my Father. And whatever you ask in my name, I will do it for you, so that the Father may be glorified through his Son. And if you ask me in my own name, I will do it. If you love me, keep my commandments. And I will ask of my Father, and he will give you another Comforter to be with you forever. And even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it has not seen him and does not know him. But you know him, because he abides with you and is in you. So, the title of the talk today is Hanukkah in a Spoon. And it started with sort of a short memoir I read. And I'm going to read a major portion of it to you. And then we'll go from there. The writer, and this was in religious news services, taped to the front window of my in-laws' house was a photocopy of a photograph of a tarnished and bent spoon. And of course there was a story behind it. My father-in-law, I. Cohen of blessed memory, was an alumnus of a number of World War II concentration camps. The spoon in the photograph was one of the items he smuggled out of Auschwitz when the Nazis moved him into Camp Number 8, a quarantine camp for those suspected of carrying typhus. Due to the illness, there were no regular labor teams in this new camp, but healthy inmates were ordered to help in its construction, which was still underway. Having had some experience in the Lodz ghetto as a mechanic, my father-in-law was assigned to assist the electrical technician in installing the camp's lighting. Given access to tools, he brought his spoon, his only possession, to work one day and surreptitiously filed down its handle turning that end of the utensil into a sharp knife, which he used for cutting the hunk of bread that he and others were allotted and had to apportion fairly. The knife then became a key to avoiding disputes and maintaining relative peace among the prisoners, while he continued to use the spoon to eat his soup ration. When winter came, he was transferred to Camp Number 4 in Kaufering, an installation similar to Auschwitz. Despite terrible deprivations and hardships, my father-in-law and other religious Jews in the camp tried, whenever possible, to maintain what Jewish law and practices they could, despite all the dangers involved. My father-in-law always kept mental track of the Jewish calendar, and he knew when Hanukkah had arrived. During a few minutes' work break, he and a group of inmates began to reminisce about how, when they were children back home before the war, their fathers would light their menorahs with such fervor and such joy. They remembered how they could never get their fill of watching the small flames sparkling like stars, how they basked in the warm, special glow. And the inmates spoke of the ancient battle that Hanukkah commemorates, the Jewish rebellion against the Seleucid Greek conquerors of the Holy Land, who were intent on erasing Jewish observance from the populace and Judaism from their hearts, and how with God's help the rebels were able to rout their enemy and resume their fully Jewish lives. If only, the prisoners wistfully mused, they could light a Hanukkah candle those nights. Although it's ideal to light an additional candle each night of the 8-day holiday, and by the way, we do this here, Jewish tradition's requirement is satisfied with the lighting of a single candle. One prisoner offered that he had a bit of margarine saved from his daily ration. That could serve as oil. And wicks? Some of those present began to unravel threads from their uniforms. But a menorah. They needed a menorah. With a smile, at least I imagine he smiled because he was a happy person, my father-in-law took out his spoon. Within moments, the small group was lighting their Hanukkah candle, reciting the requisite blessings. The prisoners stood transfixed, immersed in their thoughts of Hanukkah gone by. The small flame also kindled a glimmer of hope. As the prisoners recited the blessing, referring to the miracles wrought by God in those days, but also at this time, they understood that indeed at this time, what they needed was a miracle. Non-religious Jewish inmates, too, stood nearby and watched the luminous moment in the darkness of their concentration camp lives. My father-in-law merited personal miracles, surviving that dark time, a harrowing story in itself, and throughout his life he brimmed with gratitude for having been graced with a post-war life, and for the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren he was able to see. The photocopy depicting that spoon is now in a new house far from where I live, but each year I think of it and am reminded of my father-in-law's resilience and faith, and of the resilience and faith of the Jewish people. And I read this to come to that part, resilience and faith. I Googled through AI, through Google's AI, about resilience and suffering, and it came back with this. Resilience and suffering are intertwined, with the latter often acting as a catalyst for developing the ability to bounce back from adversity, while experiencing hardship is unavoidable. It's through creative navigating and learning from suffering that individuals can cultivate true resilience, emerging stronger and more capable in the face of future challenges. Having read this, I was reminded of a couple of other short stories or short news articles I'd encountered. One of them was in the Philippines after the last huge cyclone that leveled so much of several islands. The cyclone, among other things, created massive landslides and floods. And this particular woman and her husband lost all their adult children and grandchildren. They had lived at a lower altitude and were swept away. Devastating. They'd lost all their family. They were still looking, hoping to find some news, at least maybe bodies, or maybe somebody had survived. And they went to another town farther down that had been partially damaged, but also still had escaped some, and found no word. They have never found word of their families. But while there, they noticed a school that had been turned into an orphanage because so many children no longer had parents. And they brought back with them 5 children to care for. And within the week, they'd gone back and brought back some more children. And as of the writing, they were now caring for 42 orphans, giving them a mother and father to replace that which they had lost. And then there's an elderly man in Japan who has taken it as his responsibility to live in the no-go zone around the Fukushima nuclear plant that melted down, to take care of the animals that had been abandoned. He's been there for some years now, still healthy, which is against the odds, still taking care of the animals. This had been where he lived, but he, alone of the population, came back. And then in this country, there was an article about a woman, a grandmother, whose grandson was killed in one of the many firearms incidents. And now, since then, because this happened 10, 20 years ago, she has fostered, and in some cases adopted, over 30 children who were being victimized by the welfare system. Those of you who are familiar with it, it is not a pleasant place for any child. So each of these is an example of suffering and choosing to grow through it. Now, many people who face calamities, as I'm sure you've all witnessed, just melt. What made the difference with these people? The commonality, aside from the going through a big calamity, is that they had roots in something deeper and bigger to draw upon. And this gave them the strength, the resilience, the long view, if you will, that enabled them to find a way forward. I don't know how many of you are familiar with psychiatrist Viktor Frankl. He was another survivor of the death camps. And in the years after the death camps, he became curious. Why did some inmates survive? And why did others wither die, or commit suicide by things such as charging a camp guard to be shot or throwing themselves against the electric fence to be electrocuted. And his conclusion was those who survived had a deeper root, a sense of meaning, of a broader view of themselves, of life, of potential, a significance that they were connected with something bigger than themselves that they could draw upon. And as I was thinking about all this, I found myself thinking of some of the couples that I officiate. And if I end up talking with them to any length, I will often ask, what is their religious tradition? Do they have any religious beliefs? Because if they do, I want to be able to respect that in the service. And some have very deep ethical or spiritual internal structures. And others have, if anything, something vague like, well, I think there's a higher power. And when I hear that, I send a sort of prayer up on their behalf, because how are they going to handle the challenges, the calamities they're going to encounter in everyday life, because they don't have an internal strength. They're just, if you will, floating along. And I'm not trying to put them down and say they're going to hell or any of that crap. But they're ill prepared. And that concerns me. Now, let me be clearer. I deeply hope that none of us here, and no one we know, is bound to encounter a major life calamity anytime yet in this lifetime. I know some of us have been through deep shit, calamity in our lives, and yet you're still here. Yay. Those of us who've survived deep trauma, deep calamity, if we look inside, we had a connection. And those of you who've been fortunate enough not to experience calamitous events in your life, yay for you. May it continue. But I encourage each of us, wherever we are in our spiritual walk, to take steps to ground ourselves further in the power of the divine, in the divine counselor, as Emmett Fox talks about. And by the way, I had not read this before this evening, and yet here it is, perfect for what we're talking about. We want to be at our best when life hands challenges to us, whether they're small challenges or large challenges, or just getting through every day. And then we want to be at our best also as we walk through the world with or without challenges, but representing the divine love that each of us lives in and is part of. And to this end, I want to share a list of practices, if you will, that can help us build this resilience, build this depth of rootedness and ability to pivot on and respond to whatever we're facing. First recommendation, don't avoid the pain. Thinking of Job, he acknowledged the pain of the loss of his family, of everything that went wrong. And recent research, I saw an article just within the last week. It's interesting how the divine gives me all this information sort of piled up at once. that people survive better by feeling the pain than by trying to pretend it doesn't exist. Resilience doesn't mean ignoring or suppressing your pain, your suffering, but acknowledging it, processing the emotions healthily, and finding ways to move forward despite the pain. In contrast, I know someone whose husband died, I think it was 20 years ago, and she's still living, mourning him, living a restricted life in pain for the loss. What the world is missing because she'd allowed herself to become stuck. Another key aspect to moving forward is to change your framework to the challenges, to the pain, and look at them as opportunities for personal growth, that we can learn from the challenges, from the setback, from the pain, to become better equipped to move forward now and as we encounter future challenges. Now, as I talk, I'm reminded that we have in Lift on Therapy, one of the belief statements is, I allow myself to experience the pain and pass through me so I can prepare for the better tomorrow. And that's essentially what this is saying here. Then it's also appropriate to develop healthy coping mechanisms, seeking support from loved ones, practicing good self-care, engaging in activities that promote your physical health, your physical, your emotional, your mental well-being. Don't stultify, in other words. Plan to move forward and use the rootedness you have in your connection with the divine, in your spiritual walk, in your ethical walk, to help you do this. Certainly emphasize, build your connection and your communication channel with the great divinity. A common mistake I encounter, particularly among people who follow traditional Christian paths, is, they pray and they pray and they pray and they pray, but they're always outbound. They don't take the time for the silence. They don't take time to allow the divine to communicate with them. Critical. Richard Rohr talks about it. That's why he talks about meditation as a regular daily practice for each of us. Because that's what facilitates our hearing from the divine, our receiving those little nudges, or sometimes big nudges, on how to move forward and where to move forward. I came across a story that sort of talks about divine nudges. I've talked to you about my occasion with gooseberries, but another short story that I encountered this week. It was a lady who was mourning because her cat of umpteen years, her best friend, her solace, had died suddenly. And she was debating whether she wanted to have another cat because the pain was so great for the loss of the one that she'd had. But there came across the internet an announcement that a local pet sanctuary was having an open house, and they sent some photos along with it. And she was reminded how many cats don't have homes. And still debating, she thought, well, there's a cat here that looks interesting. Maybe I'll go take a look at it. She showed up, and they had a sort of greeting room where the cats were wandering around, and the cat she was interested in was in there. She went over to it, it ignored her. Well, so she sat down on the ground thinking maybe it would come over to her, set her purse down. And this big orange tabby walked right over, took one sniff at her knee, and lay down on her purse. And purred. Well, she wasn't sure. That was definitely different. But that wasn't the cat she had in mind. So she left. But she couldn't get the cat out of her mind. Things would keep reminding her of a cat. She'd see an orange cat walking down the street, or a story about an orange cat on the internet. So she went back a day later. The orange cat was still there. So was the one that she was interested in. The one she was interested in ignored her again. The orange cat came over, sniffed, started rubbing up against her leg, purring. So she went home and thought about it some more. Decided maybe this was a sign. You had to remember, God doesn't necessarily whack us over the head to get us to pay attention. So she went a third time, and this time she brought a cat carrier just in case. Walked into the room, put down the cat carrier, opened the door. Cat came up, sniffed her knee, walked into the cat cage, sat down, started purring. And he's been with her ever since. Says he has given her such joy. Yeah, as Mary said here, take a hint, lady. And you see what Trish is showing us a picture of there. So, be alert to that still small voice within, as the Quakers say. Those small nudges, even in the midst of calamity. Because you don't know what the divine has in store for you. Now, I've mentioned a couple times, and it seems appropriate here. Back in my 20s, I was diagnosed schizoid, paranoid. You'll never be normal. Your wife should divorce you because you're not capable to be a decent husband. And I realize now the psychiatrist was subtly telling me, go kill yourself. You're hopeless. Now, I said a prayer on the way out. God, help me out here. At least I was that stubborn. But piece by piece over time, situations were placed, people I was introduced to who were able to help me heal. One of the weirdest ones was I got an announcement that Dana Robinson of the Michael Harner Institute was coming into town to teach a course on shamanship. I had no interest in shamanship. But why did it come to me? It was addressed to me. My sister happened to call that evening. Both my sisters were heavily involved in shamanship. And I mentioned that I'd gotten this flyer about Michael Harner, and I didn't know why it had shown up in it. She said, oh, Mother always hoped that you would get a chance to have a course with Michael Harner. So I signed up. The gal who sent me the flyer has no idea how she got my name. But that was what moved me toward the shamanic work that I do now. Or the Filipino couple I told you earlier about. All they were doing was looking for the bodies or maybe a surviving member of their family. But they happened to go by that school that was now an orphanage, and they took the hint. Now, the stories I'm telling you about show people taking big actions. And I don't want you thinking that the only thing that counts is something earth-shattering or affecting tons and tons and tons of lives. Don't let yourself be cowed by that. because that may not be where your calling is. Let yourself simply be the representative of God as you are. That's what the Quakers did. They didn't preach. Well, they preached sometimes at their meetings, but they weren't going around knocking on doors and saying, "You got to become a Quaker. That's the only you're going to hell, thank God," or thing. They lived the life that they understood the divine wanted, the life of honesty, of love, of caring, and they changed the world. Part of that would be noticing the people around us who make life work and celebrating them. One thing you have control of, one of the few things, is that you show up where you can be useful. Showing up makes such a big difference. And showing up working for others. That's what our late President Carter did. After the calamity of being thoroughly rejected when he ran for presidency for the second term, you know what most presidents do, they just sort of dry up in the woodwork. But he had more positive effect. I heard a couple of historians talking recently. He had more positive effect in the world after his presidency than he did during presidency. He found a way to give meaning to his life and to bring more good to the world. So don't walk away from opportunities to be in service. Do be of service. And do walk in the Lord wherever you may be. That's what I have to say tonight. Any thoughts, any contributions? Lori Kay and then Liz.
That was a wonderful talk, Brian. Thank you. I'm struck particularly by the first part of it, the question of what is it that makes us survive? What is it that keeps us going? And I don't know that there's an answer, honestly. I mean, we can come up with answers, but I remember when I was first back here in Ohio after 11 years in California going broke and finding myself homeless. And I would go over to the Jewish Family Service for just a place to go and be with other people around me so that I could work and not feel like I was, alone. And there were so many amazing people I met and so many people who were without any sense of self. And they were in such distress and they were in such not only financial, but emotional and mental distress. And I had to wonder, some of them had a better situation than I did, and they were much worse off emotionally. And I was just, the question stayed with me, what is it? What is it that keeps me going? And I don't really believe in a sort of external thing without my agreement to be a part of it. Like I could have decided to exit at any point. I didn't. Something was excited in me, which was this stubbornness. And it's like, if I'm going to go out, it's not going to be for lack of trying. So I don't know if you can call that God. I don't think so. But then again, who knows? I don't know.
Thank you. I don't necessarily think it has to be called God, but it is I called it rootedness, because there's many forms of rootedness, and we're all star stuff. But we don't need to define it. You're still here, and we're glad you're here. And you made that choice. And I have among my clientele several people who've made that choice when they didn't have to. And I'm grateful for the opportunity and honored for the opportunity to walk with every one of them as they move to creating a better and better life. Okay, Liz, you were the next one up, and then we'll go to Trish.
I just wanted to say thank you, Brian. That was an excellent talk. And I have known quite a few Jewish people in my life, and I think that that word that you used, now I forget what it was, resilience. Yeah, that is definitely there. Huge energy that I always felt. Great resilience, and it was great to be in friendship with them because I learned a lot.
Okay,
But thank you. That was a great talk. Thank you, Brian.
Trish is next.
Thank you for your talk. It was amazing, and it brought up a lot of feelings in me. One of the things you talked about was to feel your feelings and not push them away or run away from them or push them aside or whatever. I grew up in an extremely abusive situation where I was almost killed multiple times, and my mother was severely mentally ill and took it out on me, and I was an only child. And it was really, 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 really bad. And if it had happened in these days, I wouldn't still be there at that home, but I was. And my escape from it was to push it all down. And what I discovered was about 30 years after the fact, something bad happened in my life, and all of this stuff came erupting out of me that I had just stuffed down for decades, literally decades. And it was horrendous. And it took me about 3 years to work through it and get it all out of me. And I told myself during that, I will never do that again. But it was my survival mode when I was a child, and it worked for me. And people tell me now, you're the most strong person, you're the strongest person I've ever met in my life. And thank you. But I got some positives out of it, and I wouldn't choose to do it again, but I got some very strong positives out of it. I'm incredibly intuitive. I can take the temperature when I walk in a room, and I know what's going on in seconds. And it's just something I do automatically because I had to, because my mother would go from one extreme, being very kind, to being just like a raving maniac. And you didn't know what you were going to get at any given moment. I'm an artist, and it made me more observant about things. So I think that makes me a better artist. I have deep empathy, and I think that's from what I went through. So it gave me some positives too, and it's taken me a long time to see those, but those are blessings. And I just really appreciated what you said about go through the pain, because you are so right. I wish I knew that back then. I wish I had that. Maybe I didn't have the strength or the ability to do it then, but I've learned it now, and I've learned it really well. And I so appreciate you saying that, because it's something nobody taught me. I just had to learn it. And I'm really grateful that you're sharing that message, because it's so important. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Okay, Ellie. And yes, hearts to you.
Thank you for the talk. I've known, as people have said, I've known several, Jewish people. I've gone to several Jewish congregations, and several of them had two numbers on their wrists, not just the one. And my first thought would be, oh, I never could have gone through that. No, I never voiced that. But the next thought that would be on the heels of those words, you don't get grace to go through something you don't go through. And I've been through things that people have said, how did you go through that? Some of you know the recent things, the medical things. And whether I want to call it divine intervention or the goddess or whatever, I know it's a deep strength. I can't tell you when I have it. I just know it is literally something I get before I walk through something. The resilience, you said the suffering is the catalyst for the resilience. You know, there's this saying, I've heard it in a lot of Christian circles, but I've seen it too recently in other circles that I'm in now, is that, or the saying that is something about God gives his greatest generals the greatest battles or something like that. And, you know, sometimes I wonder why I have to go through certain things, or other people that I know. Why do they have to go through this and this and this? Wouldn't it be easier if they didn't have? And then I think about that. Well, if I didn't have this, would I know how to navigate that? No, I wouldn't. And so I've learned to be grateful for those tough things that I go through. Because as Trish shared, you know, there are certain things that I have because of the things I've gone through that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And so, you know, I've learned the thankfulness, the gratefulness, the gifts. Sometimes I tell Donovan, you know, the things I go through and the gifts I have, I go, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse because of the things that I have. But the flip side is, you know, it's the way you look at it. And, you know, I was realizing earlier today that, you know, him and I are out in the middle of nowhere, you know, not really surrounded by people that we know, you know, physically, but all across the US, we know people we can reach out to, you know, by a phone call, by technology, you know, by a message. And we're immediately connected. You know, Brian, you said, you know, if you need anything, call. You know, many here, you know, in the meeting have said the same thing. You know, many have sent me messages, memes, you know, and it's just like, wow, you know, I needed whatever it was at the moment it was sent. You know, those people that have sent those things, you didn't know. How could you? Unless you were already connected, or unless you went through that nudging as you were talking about, Brian. You know, so thank you. You know, thank you for that. You were asking, you know, what makes us survive, you know, keep us going. I think besides the resilience, you know, you use that word rootedness. You know, it's what we can go back to and see, I think, and then grab a hold. We're talking about the menorah. We have a small one that we light every year. You know, it's more of a tree and cherry blossoms and flowers and branches, and you can kind of see how the branches are intertwined, you know, like a tree. We have a beautiful tree outside that we get to watch. You know, I think it's some type of willow tree. But you think of what a tree does, it grows and its roots go way down. You know, really deep roots. You know, and when we think of how we're supposed to be, you know, I think of a tree. How our roots are supposed to go really deep down, and that's part of our resilience. We're rooted in whatever it is that keeps us strong. that keeps us going, are surviving. Lori Kay, you were sharing, all the people that you got to be around. Life presents us with opportunities that we get to see and be rooted in. And those intertwine, connect us to continually being rooted in life experiences. And I believe that's how we survive, how we're all interconnected to things, rooted into things. So thank you, Brian.
And thank you for what you had to say. Anybody else with a contribution? Doesn't look that way. Okay, let's move into our silence, folks. It looks like we may have a whole bunch of stuff for the divine to download to us today. So I'll call you back in a few minutes. So thank you, God, for bringing us together, for allowing us to share your wisdom, your love, your teachings, our caring for one another. Thank you for guiding our feet as we depart from here to be in your service and to be in our service in a better way. Thank you for giving us new understandings, new perspectives, new experiences of love and loving. We thank you for guiding us as we depart and bringing us back here again sometime soon so we can walk together and share together and laugh together and love together again. We say thank you, Father, for all the good you've brought to each of us and are bringing to us, and all the joy and all the love. We say thank you, thank you, thank you, and amen. So, lots of love to yourself, to you all. If you're in snow, be careful. If you're not in snow, enjoy, and see you all next week.
I'm going to say at the end of your prayer differently. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, baby.
Love it.
Hey, Brian.
Okay.